So good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us on the penultimate social housing roundtable of the year. I did a count up the other day. This is actually number 47 this year of the roundtables. So by the time we finish, we'll have done 48, which out of 52 weeks in the year, I'm not taking it as a bad thing, seeing as we don't do them after bank holidays. So yeah, I was quite surprised myself at that one, Joe. But today is, I feel, a really kind of poignant conversation. I think with everything going on in the housing world at the moment, with it getting scrutinised correctly in everything that's going on, it's really important that we look at, there's so much chat around, oh, well, housing can be better, but can it actually be better? What resources are in place? What are we missing? And everything that goes with it. So was delighted to speak with Katy Bird. I remember when we started speaking, about a month ago, maybe, started talking about this.
Yeah, about a month ago.
And said, look, is there space to bring this to roundtable? And as ever, there's always a yes. It was just whether we're going to get it in this year or not. And I was glad that we could. So to anyone who is joining for the first time, just a little bit of housekeeping. Please feel free to dive in at any point with any conversation points. Either use the chat function or use the raise hand. Raising hand is always brilliant for me because we get more people kind of coming into the conversation. So just raise your hand, and I'll bring you in the conversation and I'll monitor all of that so everybody gets to speak who wishes to. I've done the wrong one. I did the thumbs up. How do I get rid of the thumbs up? Goodness me, nearly a year of doing these, I'm clicking the wrong buttons. But without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Katy to make her introductions and kind of describe why I guess you brought the conversation to the table today. So Katy, over to you.
Thank you, Matt. So I'm going to try and share my screen. I can, 2 seconds. I've tried to keep it as brief as possible and just really act as a discussion point, really. So hang on, doing really well, aren't I, with the technical side of stuff?
We're both flying this morning, I wouldn't worry.
Yeah. So I'm Katy Bird. I'm the Strategy Research and Improvement Manager at Believe Housing. And the reason I kind of wanted to do this roundtable with Matt this morning is to have a little bit of a chat and to kind of provoke some discussion around the resourcing of social housing at the moment and all the challenges that we're kind of facing. So I've tried to keep it brief, like I say, and try to just encourage some discussion. So in terms of challenges, as a sector, we're kind of in unprecedented times, I would say. There's been lots of change in a very small period of time, increased financial pressure in terms of the business and for our customers. So cost of living crisis is biting people it wouldn't ordinarily hit. The political focus on social housing, I'm sure many people have seen the media recently in terms of the coverage of social housing and kind of the perception of social housing changing. We're being asked to deliver more for less. So at a time when kind of belts have been tight and roles have been asked to do things like retrofit programs, deliver more for our customers, deliver new services for our customers, and we're doing that on a kind of a stricter budget than ever. Even with a 7% cap, which I don't think was expected. Matt and I were saying the other day, expected 3% or a freeze. Even with that in place, that is a rent cut effectively. That is us not having as much money to spend on the things we'd like to spend it on. Our operating environment is constantly changing. So I've had a number of prime ministers, a number of housing ministers. There's been white papers, bills, and all sorts of things in the last 12 months that have come in and changed. Leveling up was in and out. So it's constantly changing in terms of the environment we're operating in. And then the challenge of attracting and retaining staff. So our organisation in particular struggles in kind of the trades areas, skills that kind of we need to make our customers' homes safe. There's also a lack of green jobs and a lack of kind of direction from the government as to where those green jobs are going to come from and how we're going to keep those jobs within the housing sector. So not all doom and gloom, I will say. What can we do about it? So in terms of kind of our approach, I believe we'll have a proactive and strategic approach to horizon scanning. So horizon scanning is one of the things that I've talked to Matt at length about because I get really excited when it comes to things like horizon scanning. I'm a big believer in understanding the environment that you're in, both like kind of locally, regionally, nationally, understanding the partners that you can work with, understanding the people that you can talk to, and being able to understand the issues and the solutions to kind of the problems that you've got. Investing in culture and innovation. This is something our organisation is really passionate about, and I'm really passionate about. Investing in the culture of the people that work for you and making sure that the culture is right, and the innovation, encouraging that innovation within your staff and your business to drive forward change. Creating and strengthening partnerships. So again, having spoken to Matt, there's a partnership right there that kind of you need to create and strengthen if you want to deliver something, or you want to change things, or you want to have really meaningful discussions. I choose to focus on outcomes rather than outputs. And this is something that I think you have to be really brave to focus on. It's really easy to focus on the numbers game. And I think at the moment, with kind of the media and the things that have been thrown at us as a business, it would be really easy for us to just focus on what do the numbers tell us. That's not necessarily what's right for our customers or our business or even the people that work for us. And I think you have to be brave to choose to focus on the outcomes rather than outputs, and be brave to be passionate. I'm very, very passionate about where I work. I'm very passionate about what I do. And it takes a very brave person to admit that sometimes, because quite often it's easy just to be part of a pack that does the norm. I'm passionate about what I do, and I'm very proud of where I work for. And I'm very proud of working in social housing. Regardless of what the media is saying about it currently, I'm very, very proud of working in social housing. And I think it is up there with the likes of the NHS and the police, because it provides a very necessary service for the most vulnerable people in society. And it's my way of giving back to the community. So why is this kind of the right way to do things, or the way that I think we should do things anyway? The long-term benefits of continuing to invest in what I think, I don't know whether Emma's on the call, but Emma used this word a while ago, Emma Lindley. Essential luxuries is what kind of my job role and some of the innovation and culture roles are seen as. Continue to invest in those jobs will far outweigh any sort of short-term gains you would have by cutting them. The long-term benefits is the direction of the organisation. It is clear. You're able to anticipate change sometimes before it happens. You're much more prepared as an organisation. Investing in the culture and innovation will create an organisation with staff that own the change. We've just had a fantastic 3-day innovation festival where we had all of our staff were invited to attend. And over the 3 days, it was about getting our staff to think about how we can do things differently through creative activities. It was based on a movie theme, and I was in charge of the props department. So we got to build things out of Lego, and it was getting staff to kind of, we had people who were plumbers, plasterers, you had repairs managers, you had frontline staff, you had back office staff in terms of finance, all mixed up, working together to build things. And that for me is really, that's the epitome of innovation, is getting your staff to drive that change for you. You are not going to drive the change if you inflict it on your staff. What you need is your staff to drive that change for you, because you can learn a lot from your staff. Partnership working creates best practice. You'll find wherever you have a really good partnership, there's a lot of dialogue, there's a lot of communication, and that's where you get your best practice. That's where you get your learning. That's where you get people who are really open to ideas and open to sharing things with people, and there's a level of trust. And actually focusing on outcomes drives the right behavior. If you focus on outputs, people do things because they've always done it. If you focus on your outcomes, people do it because it's the right thing to do. And that's one of the things we focus on. Is it the right thing for us? Is it the right thing for the business? Is it the right thing for the colleague? And that's something that is drummed into our staff. That's something that we really are passionate about delivering for our customers, is doing the right thing. And being passionate can be infectious. I have a habit of talking quite a lot. And I am very, very passionate about what I do. And when I get onto the subject of horizon scan or something else I'm passionate about, I do tend to kind of hopefully motivate others to get passionate about the subjects I'm passionate about. And that is why I wanted to do this roundtable today with Matt. So thank you very much.
No, that's great. I mean, I'm going to take off because I know you asked me to remove the slides. Oh, there we are. Brilliant.
Did it myself.
Fantastic. So I know when we were first talking, you used this term horizon scanning a lot. And obviously it's because it's a passion thing, and obviously it's there for belief. When we were talking about whether housing has actually got the resources to change, and I think this is something, and I know we're going to come on to a few points you've made today. I know certainly there's a couple of times in the roundtable this year we've talked about, you know, numbers just being utilised to support anything, and actually half the time they're rubbish. What do you mean, I guess, by horizon scanning for the sector, and where do you feel not the biggest resources being missed, but what would you like to see housing have as a resource collectively as a sector to really drive improvement? Because it's clear that what's going on at the moment isn't working.
Yeah, I think I think we're missing a trick sometimes. We do have in some organisations, we do have an investment in horizon scan, and I'm very lucky that my organisation is very passionate about that. So I'm very lucky I have all the way from my chief executive, exec directors, a passion to know what's going on around them and the world around them. And I think sometimes housing does tend to be quite insular. So you will come across organisations where they're very focused on a housing mentality, and there's lots you can learn from other organisations that aren't necessarily housing organisations. I think, you know, one of the things that we've done as part of our innovation programme is we've gone out and talked to organisations that aren't housing organisations. So when we've talked about change programmes, we've talked to the likes of Amazon, we've talked to the likes of, there was like a health, I can't remember the name of it, but there was a health company in Amsterdam that we've spoken to about new ways of kind of delivering services for customers. So the ideas of self-managing teams, do you need a manager in the role? This idea of empowering your customers to kind of do more for themselves. And I think sometimes as a collective, we don't always utilise what we could in terms of that best practice and that sharing of knowledge. And we are getting better at it. I think sometimes we consider ourselves to be specialists. So we're housing specialists. That doesn't necessarily deliver what we need for our customers, and we can learn a lot from other organisations that aren't housing specialists. So in terms of horizon scanning, for me, it's not just your basics. So I'm very passionate about it. So I will read things like cabinet papers from the local authority where we kind of based, because that's my passion. So I want to know what the funding gaps are going to be in the region, because I want to understand that for our customers, because that will impact on how our customers live and what we need to fill in terms of gaps. That is the way that I work. There are other organisations, private organisations, who won't call it horizon scanning, but have a very good way of measuring what the environment around them is and how it's changing. And I think we can learn a lot from those organisations, and a lot from kind of not being insular. I think we are quite insular, and I think that's possibly why we do go wrong sometimes. We're quite insular in our approach to things, I think.
It's interesting, and certainly why I think it was one of the reasons why these roundtables have kind of worked, and it's taken, obviously this year, you know, over the course of the year, they've got more and more popular, which is brilliant. But there aren't enough platforms for even housing people alone to come together without spending a lot of money. Yeah, the events cost a lot, the awards nights cost a lot. There was an event in Birmingham that was 2-3 months ago that I was going to potentially go to. It was 500-600 quid for a day, and I was like, I'm not spending that on going to an event for the day, because I don't feel it's necessarily worth it. And yet, when people do come together, there is change. But I know you and I have talked as well about a difference kind of between that local authority and that housing mindset, that actually sometimes there are differences between, and I don't know whether or not it's size of business, I don't know whether or not it is local authority against housing associations, however that might look, but that wish to horizon scan and that wish to get involved in seeing what other sectors are doing as well, there is a lot of disparity there.
There is, and I think one of the things we talked about is that what I think the local authority here referred to as the brain drain. So social housing has in the past been quite a lucrative kind of career for some people. I think we've had that conversation as well. Local authorities aren't necessarily able to match what housing associations will pay. So some of the things that we've kind of identified with our local authority is we have quite a lot of skill sets that they would love to recruit, but they can't afford to pay what we would pay for that. So when they're developing local plans and things, they don't necessarily attract the same as what we would, and we possibly have skills that they don't have or they aren't able to afford to have. So those essential luxuries that we talk about, they have even more essential luxuries. So there are local authorities where they don't have corporate policy teams. There are local authorities that don't have process mapping teams anymore. They have to hire in consultants to do that because they're not able to afford to keep up with the market pace outside of them. And I think the approach to horizon scanning, it depends on your local authority. So our local authority, Durham, is a pretty good partner with us. We work really, really well with Durham, and we have a lot of conversations. I have worked with the local authorities where they are very insular and they don't really see housing associations as a partner. It's quite political in some areas because those local elected members did not want to give up the housing association that they had to give up, and they see it as something that the council should still run. Customers still think that we are the council, which, you know, we haven't been for a number of years, but they do think that we're the council. So I think you're right in what you're saying. There's different approaches to horizon scanning, and I think there should be a lot more cross-sector work in terms of, you know, the levelling up stuff. I was really quite passionate about that because I thought, I don't know whether or not we'll be able to deliver on this, but actually that's a really, really good thing that somebody's talking about, this need to level up, and it not just being a north-south divide, but actually there are areas of London that need levelling up with the rest of London. This idea that there are areas that are left behind, again, I think it's a discussion that you should be having, and the only way you're going to achieve any of that is if you have that collective horizon scanning as a region, as an area, and seeing what you need as an area in a region, not being insular. And I think housing has a really big role to play. You know, you've got links between health and housing, you've got links between housing and employment. It's all interconnected, everything's interwoven and interconnected in people's lives. And at the centre of that is somebody having a home, They've got to have a home to be able to find a job. They've got to have a home, a quality home, to have a good standard of living. If you get that right, you know, the impacts you have on things like the NHS, on the economy in the local area is massive. You've got to have transport links in order for them to get to jobs from home. So if we're building somewhere, we should be building somewhere or investing in an area where there are already transport links, or having a conversation about what are the transport links? Are they good transport links? We have quite rural communities in our in Believe. So the Dales area is part of our capture area, and they will really struggle to get to employment because they are sometimes a good 40 minutes, 50 minutes from the nearest town or city. But we need to take some responsibility for that. They're our customers and we should be helping them.
I think it's really interesting. I think, you know, certainly when you and I have talked about, are there enough resources? The answer is yes, but no one's sharing them. Like, no. Collectively, if all of that information came into one central place, then there are the resources there, but it's getting access to them, and how do we break down those barriers between competitors, I guess, that don't need to be competitors. On the chat there, I can see that Joe Leckie said we promote our customer service training. So Joe's from Big Picture Training, who are amazing. I've done a lot of work with them, and they do a lot of horizon scanning. They promote our customer service training as being delivered through a social housing lens, although it is all about best practice from outside the sector. Do you think we're doing ourselves a disservice saying it's delivered through a social housing lens?
I think social housing is amazing. That's why I love working for social housing. And I think, although I'm saying that we kind of need to be less insular, I think we should be proud to work for social housing. I think we should be proud of the experience and the knowledge that we've got in social housing as well. So it's not just about us looking outside, but actually being able to share that best practice with other organisations as well. There's lots of experience and there's lots of tangible benefit from us being able to share that experience with other organisations. We have contact with some of the most vulnerable customers in the entire country, and who better to speak for those customers than their landlord? And that should be our responsibility, and we should take that responsibility quite seriously.
And it's interesting because, again, we understand it, but so many people outside of social housing have no idea what it is. Absolutely no idea. And I've talked to family when I was setting up my business. I've got partners that I work with who help me with the back office. But how do you recruit in social housing? What is social housing is always the first question. Michelle, I'm going to bring you in before going back to the chat. Thank you. Good to have you with us today.
Morning, everybody. Yeah, there's some really valid points there, Katie, in this horizon scanning. And sometimes when I look at how social housing has been built upon the legislation and the policies and the local policies, sometimes is that outdated. So looking at the planning and the census to see what kind of housing is actually needed. Do you think there has become too much complacency from those that have actually been in the sector too long and in the same kind of roles? I mean, we've seen a lot in the media with regards to chief exec salaries, and how much we're actually paying for some of these services, and it is public money. That's what we keep being told, it's public money. So, you know, what should that flip look like going forward? Because if we're to remain this passionate about social housing in this community, how can we make it accessible, make it more attractive for people coming into the sector, when there's this big expanse between front or keystone workers, like people who are dealing in the care homes or customer facing contact centres, and that massive gap with COO and exec salaries?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, because I think it's a difficult one, because what you don't want to do is not make being a chief executive of a social housing association attractive to people. You do want to have the best people that are in those roles, and I think if you do get the best person in that role, they are value for money. I know one of the things I love about where I work is that our chief executive is incredibly passionate about our customers, very, very passionate about them, and very accessible. You know, I have worked in other organisations where you'd see a chief executive on a corridor and you wouldn't dare look at them in the face, because that's the old mentality of kind of the hierarchy that exists. That's not what exists here. And very challenging kind of exec team where I work around not being removed from the customers. So it is all about customer voice. And I think if you're getting value for money, I think you can justify the salaries. I think where the media are kind of like highlighting the figures, they're not necessarily drawing a conclusion that they're bad chief executives. They're just saying they paid a lot of money. And those same people, if they were in the same roles in the private sector, would get a heck of a lot more money. So the question, I suppose, is how do you ensure that you're getting value for money if that's what we're going to have to pay to attract that talent? I suppose that's the question, rather than are we paying too much money? I don't think we're gonna lessen the salaries of people who are chief executives when they've got a lot of responsibility. I think it's more about making sure that they're accountable and they are value for money. And if I think about some of the stuff that's been in the media recently, there was definitely some kind of kickback around somebody not wanting to resign because there was something that happened on their watch. And there was debate around whether or not that was the right thing or the wrong thing to do, when only that individual knows what's gone on. But the media very much seizes on, the money element of it. And I think they're missing out on the fact that actually you do have to have a lot of knowledge and a lot of skills to work in this sector. You do. This isn't a game. People's lives are in the person's hands who is in charge of this organization. And actually, you need really, really fantastic chief executives if you want to drive the sector forward. I think in terms of your point about people being in it too long, I think that's a very, very valid point. And I think we could do a lot more to attract external people who haven't been in the house in a long time. I only joined in 2018, and before that I worked in accounts and I worked in banking. So I've got a little bit more of a diverse perspective, I suppose, than some of the colleagues that I work with. That's not to say that people who worked here a long time aren't passionate, and that's why they've worked here a long time. So it's a complicated question that you're asking, because there isn't a right answer, I don't think. I think,
and it was actually, I was watching QI last night, and there was a report on 2017, and I was trying to find it and it basically said that CEOs actually don't have a big impact on the culture and the organization, and they actually do more damage than good. And I will have to probably go back and watch it to see if he actually mentions the report that it was. But yeah, I agree that there are some fantastic people out there, CEOs, exec teams. Sometimes what I do challenge is how much knowledge you actually need at that level of housing in itself to be the leader that the organization actually needs, rather than the knowledge on, the basis of answering those day-to-day questions around about the legislation and, what do we do in this situation, or, where can we go in this? And I think there's also been too many times where I've seen it's too complicated to change a policy or procedure, so nothing happens. And sometimes I think, we have to take that step back.
I know you and I have talked about this. There's just too many people involved.
Yeah.
From the exec teams are massive, that actually to try and make change, you just don't bother.
Exactly. It just makes it too difficult, so nothing is done. And I think that is, I've looked at, is the hierarchy right? Should it be encouraged to have more matrix systems set up in a housing organisation, rather than this silo working of having these different areas of expertise, because it's not shared. There's not a greater understanding of how the organisation works. It's organic, it keeps changing, but we can't be, it's more reactive than proactive. There's no future thinking about what's it going to look like in 5 years' time. It's just always now. But yeah, it's a great conversation as always, Matt. Okay.
No, I think it's really interesting, and certainly, I can see from the chat there that, Claire's mentioned herself that she does data protection for many sectors, but sells herself on a social housing experience and knowledge. And I think there is something to be said for knowing the sector. But as Katie's pointed out, we can sometimes become too fixated on that and going, well, no, everybody needs social housing experience. Like, well, there's a lot more you can bring. And when we talk about housing not having enough resources, when we talk about the fact that actually at the moment it isn't in a good place, that next year is going to be an incredibly difficult year for the sector, especially I think the next kind of 3 to 6 months through the winter and then into the spring is going to be incredibly difficult, and more stories are going to come out, more issues with damp and mold. Every person, every leader in housing I'm speaking to at the moment is suddenly talking about damp and mold. And while that's great on one side, there is that question of, well, why haven't you been talking about it for the last X amount of time? And unfortunately, stuff to like Right to Buy hasn't helped that, because the best quality stock got sold off, and so you're left with the stock that wasn't built as well and does have issues with damp and mold and everything that goes with it. So the sector's in a difficult place. the knowledge and the skills you need are out there, but people are either not accessing because they don't know where to look, or they're too proud, or, oh, I know housing, I know what's going on, we'll get this fixed, without actually sometimes being a bit more effective. One last point, and then I'm going to bring Chris Todd in. I can see Doe's mentioned that actually she once had an hour-long car journey with your chief exec, Katie. I believe is it Bill?
Bill, yeah.
Changed her views in such a small time, very inspirational. And she agreed. She said, I'm not sure you need in-depth operational knowledge to lead, but you do need an understanding of the sector. And I certainly think across your exec team, you need that. And as she's put there, change goes in the too hard box. And Claire's backed that up by saying there are lots of silos in housing. I'm going to bring Wasim's point in a moment, but Chris, good to have you with us. Please do come in. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, morning everyone. I suppose from my perspective, it's also down to there is no consequences to poor performance. There's no consequences to the changes and things like that. And that's the thing what I'm finding more and more. Every organisation I've been in recently seems to be going through change, but it's only scratching the surface. It's not looking at the last 5-10 years. It's not looking into the next 5 and 10 years. Like the organisation I'm currently at the moment, this is the 10th change in the last 10 years, because that's what happens, the change. But it's really only a sticking plaster. Yes, I agree, damp and mold is a massive thing, but that's really probably the first chief exec we've seen removed from post for a number for any time I can remember. In addition to that, the regulators, what happens, that the downgrade, but fundamentally they still get the government funding, they still get the other elements of it. So there is no consequence to anything. If you were in private business, you'd have board members what would be looking at, they'd be wanting the shares, they'd be wanting the dividends coming out, but there's nothing within social housing what does that. So again, there isn't anything what really requires people to actually move forward. And again,
that accountability piece is huge.
Yeah.
I know we've talked about it a couple of times on the roundtable this year, but that accountability piece in housing is massive. And I know for the first time, obviously, Michael Gove has come out and called out 5 businesses, but they're all failed with the regulator. But as you say, there's no actual issues. They've been called out, but they've already been called out before in the media. And I know, I think it was obviously Rochdale have been told, well, they're going to lose their funding. But the problem then is the only people that really seems to affect is the tenants.
Absolutely.
What's the effect for the RP or for the local authority? And I completely agree with you. If you've got a solution, I'd love to hear it.
No solution. But again, I think someone's mentioned already about people work in housing, and I'd like to think that the majority of people that work in housing do have a little bit of a calling for housing. It's one of them. People do have a great passion for housing. But again, it's quite a lot of people work in the same organisation for a number of years. Quite a lot of it is jobs for life, local authorities, jobs for life sort of side of things. I'm a newbie, being here a year, and I'm probably the only one what's actually worked in a different organisation, and that was the same in other organisations. So again, it's that balance. I know from Matt, you'll probably comment on it more, we've got that generation of people that probably work in organisations 3 to 5 years. That seems to be the trend lately, that they move on and move on and move on. So they do see different organisations, but I've got a lot of people see just one organisation and that one organisation of how they do stuff. But again, we can do these best practice sessions, we can do all them different things, but fundamentally, it's certain organisations don't have money, so they don't have the appetite to change.
One business actually recently, and they weren't even that senior person in the business, but they just had to pay to do their redundancy cost them £50,000, and it's because of length of service. And it's those kind of things where there are definite issues. Wasim put in the chat there, completely agree with the difficulties of changing policies and procedures. Very important to have a hierarchy who encourage change within the organisation. And as Michelle's pointed out, it costs more to get rid of an employee than to recruit. I've always been curious on what the actual cost of restructures and redundancy is. Hidden costs which aren't reported on. So much of it can be written off as unexpected costs as well, but actually, sometimes it doesn't make any sense. Claire, great to have you with us. Do come in.
Hi, Matt. Thank you. Just loads of things sparking off from what's being said, as always, from these sessions, so lively and interesting. But I just wanted to pick up on what Chris was saying about that accountability and that lack of accountability. It's so true. I don't know what the answer is. I always say that on here. I don't know what the answer is, but I've got lots of questions. but it links to me with what Sian was saying recently. Sian, you're here, aren't you? Yes, about the KPIs being reported to the board, and they're being cherry picked and they're being massaged, and that accountability seems to kind of gets diluted by going, well, we'll just report on the right things and we'll report them in the right way, and then everybody's happy. And KPIs are another big passion of mine, being in the data world, but the wrong KPIs will drive the wrong behavior, and will just keep adding to that layers and layers of kind of massaging figures or reporting on the best figures and ignoring the rest of them, and just adding to that lack of accountability. So on that depressing note.
No, and lovely. I mean, Katie, I know you and I have talked before about KPIs and their necessity. I know it's something that you've looked at with Believe, because obviously looking at that wider strategy piece. How do you kind of see that changing, I guess, for either Believe or what do you think should change across the sector in the next kind of 12 months or so?
Well, we're really at an exciting point at the moment in that we've got a transformation program that is kicking off. It's already kind of had the first discovery phases, and we've got 3 pilots currently going in terms of new ways of work, and then the actual service reviews and service improvement starts in January time. So again, it comes back to that outcomes rather than outputs. So some of the things we're trialing are the team of tomorrow, which is a self-managing team, does all of the traditional things that a housing neighbourhood officer would do, plus so things like sustainment, things like employability, all of your nice to haves, your essential luxuries, but in one role, but no manager, no team leader. And so the KPIs around them doing the right thing. And that's a very interesting kind of premise to give to staff, is that if it's the right thing to do, then it's the right thing, and you don't actually need to ask anybody. So when we're talking about policies and procedures, yes, there are regulatory requirements. We have to have a tenancy management policy, for example. We have to make sure the person living there is who they say they are. But if you actually look at what we're actually told we have to do under regulation, all of the other policies and procedures are things we've created in-house to make our lives easier. And so saying to a team, is it the right thing to do for the business? Is it the right thing to do for the customer? Is it the right thing to do for the colleague? Is actually quite empowering for those members of staff. And I'm happy to report so far.
Who manages those budgets? How is that managed? Because I'm interested in that, because I was speaking to a director yesterday at Housing who said that their frontline team had told a candidate, that's me in work talk, had told a tenant that who had severe damp and mould and had been moaning for ages and nothing been done, said, we're not giving them compensation. And the director stepped in and went, why aren't you? Because there's clearly been an issue and we've dropped the ball. So how do budgets get managed in a process like that, Katie?
So at the moment, they have a small discretionary budget, just to see how that kind of would work. But the idea would be that kind of things like your community investment budget would sit with that team, and they would be able to invest it however they choose to invest it. But also things like your damp and your mold, your repairs, they would have a much more proactive approach to kind of being able to prioritize jobs, because at the moment the repairs team sits outside of that team, and although they kind of help them schedule the work, they aren't able to kind of rejig jobs. So if you've got somebody who's got severe damp and mold, that team doesn't have control at the moment of whether or not that would be prioritized. And the vision would be, they know those customers, and so they know that area, they know what needs to be prioritized, and they would then inform the work. That is where we would like to get to.
I mean, I guess that's giving them the resources to make change. And I think that's sometimes where people do get it wrong.
It's kind of, it's a lessons learned for the staff as well, though, because you give them a budget and say that is all you have to spend. You have to spend it wisely. So you have instances where they'll say, oh, there's this issue and I don't want to spend my budget, right? But if you spend your budget on that, you can't spend it on anything else. And so in some ways, it's really good at getting them to take ownership around what it means for customers when you spend their money and what you spend their money on. So there's been kind of two sides. So it's empowering that they can do whatever you want to do, as long as it's within the regulatory guidance kind of thing. It's the right thing. But also it's that ownership piece, which I think will have been missing as a sector, is those people who are out on the ground having some ownership around, if you make a decision, it's your decision and it impacts on customers. It's not some manager in the back office that's taking responsibility. You are making that decision for your customers because they are your customers, they're on your patch. And that's actually been working quite well, because it's getting them to think about both the question and the solution, and what the solution might have been previously, which was, I'll just ask for some money from the manager or the team leader. They now have a thought process around how they're coming to that decision and what the consequences of making that decision are. So for
that will massively help with accountability in the sector moving forward, particularly leaders of tomorrow. And as Joe's mentioned there, it comes back to what smaller businesses do. And we lose that when we scale up, and big businesses do get lost in that ethos. And I'm a firm believer, absolute firm believer, that some housing associations are just way too big. So love that. And certainly something I'd love to see across the sector a bit more. Where some people have got their hand up. So Alison, I'm going to bring you in. Thank you for coming with us today.
Hi, sorry, this comment's a bit previous because I was driving when you were having the discussion, so I couldn't butt in. The bit about whether people from outside the sector bring, new things to it, and I understand all that, but I don't know the answer to this. But I'm involved in professional housing education as a tutor and so on, and there's a lot of discussion, isn't there, about housing as a profession. But if we go back to that, well, anyone can walk in and do it. Where does that leave the professional bit? You wouldn't expect to just become a teacher overnight and come from another sector. I'm not saying it's wrong, but I just think we need to square in our own heads what that means, because otherwise what are we saying to people? It is a profession, but you can wander into it whenever from somewhere else, and there might be an answer that can encompass both, but I've not got it at the moment.
I really like that. And I know the busiest roundtable of this year was the one which discussed whether or not housing needed a mandatory qualification. We had 58 people come into it, and I think it will be a discussion that goes on and on. There was definitely, I know when we got to the end of that argument, that balance between we can't afford to not attract people from outside the sector into it because they're bringing ideas that we desperately need, but that we professionalize it and go, well, actually, to be in it, you should be qualified. Where the answer lies, it seemed to be at the time, which was you must get a qualification in your first 6 months or first year, but how high up that goes is definitely up for question, because you can't have an entire executive team that aren't qualified and going, well, they're all going to get qualified this year, because as you say, that it makes a mockery of it. So I don't know what that answer is, but it's a really, really fair point. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, Katie.
I mean, I was really looking. I got on a graduate program for local government, so I came from outside the sector and was invested in, which is why I was really, really lucky. I think it is a balancing act, because I think you don't want to deter people from coming to social housing who don't want to do a qualification as well. There are people out there who are very passionate at being neighbourhood officers but do not want to do a qualification. They're just passionate about people. So it's finding that right balance, isn't it?
So, isn't it, between you can get qualified without doing an exam, you can get qualified for time served or showcasing skills, and I agree. But the fact that you were brought in on a graduate program to do what you're doing, I think speaks volumes, because that's what we need to be doing. You're coming in, you're clearly in a position of influence in the business, but you're doing it through a qualification program, and therefore you're getting both sides of it. I'd love to see more of it in the sector, and I don't think enough is done. Claire, I'm going to go to you. Then we've got Michelle, Nigel, Katie. Please dive in as we continue. This is excellent. So Claire, back to you.
Hello, sorry, it's me again. I just wanted to pick up on Katie's point about doing the right thing and empowering people to do the right thing. Love that as well. But I would also be very wary of making sure you've got the right parameters and the right guidance around it. Again, coming from my experience, I work in data protection, so I'm seeing it through that lens. But I know of some circumstances where do the right thing was a mantra across the organisation, and people used it to overlook data protection. In one case in particular, somebody said, I know I shouldn't tell you this because of data protection, but I think it's the right thing to do. They didn't know who they were speaking to. They didn't actually know if it was the right thing. They were just trusting somebody, and they were sharing information that they shouldn't have and could have caused horrendous harm to somebody. And they used not the excuse, but they built it on, I was told to do the right thing. But I do have an answer to that partially. I'm always encouraging my clients to build data protection into their processes and procedures and policies and their guidance notes. It shouldn't be something separate, because 99% of what you're doing in social housing is with people. And where there's people, there's data protection, or there should be. And we, at the moment, we give it to the data protection officer and we say it's over there and we'll deal with that if and when they bring it up. But writing the procedures with really clear guidance on this is what you can say, this is what you can share, this is what you should collect data-wise. You don't need to collect shoe size, you know, you collect this, that, and the next thing for these purposes. Start with purpose always is another of my mantras. Excuse me. And that really can help. So I completely on board with, you know, doing the right thing, as long as people know where the parameters around the right thing.
I think that ties in actually with Joe's point in the comments, which is I'd love to see the dynamics of it. You'd need to be a high performing team to manage and prioritise their resources without arguing amongst themselves. So how are you doing that over there, Katie?
So they have a coach, but it is very much a coach and not a team leader or a manager. They have a coach who helps them have those conversations. And we have done so it is a pilot as well. So I should stress it's a pilot, not the entire organisation that's not doing what it should be. So it is a pilot, and they were handpicked for that exact reason, in that we want passionate people. So it's a very, very good pilot. It is handpicked in that we've got people who are engaged and who are going to do the right thing and are what we would expect in terms of the behaviours of the organisation. How you roll that out is a completely different question. But it, for me, coming back to Claire's point on the GDPR, that would fall down in terms of, is it right for the business? It's not right for the business to share that information, so you don't share it. So it's about encouraging them to kind of have that ability to have those conversations, and that's where the coaches come in really useful, to have those conversations around covering all of those things off, because something might be right for a customer, but it's absolutely not right for the business. And so you have to have a discussion around whether or not that's the right thing to do. And it probably isn't, if it's not right for the colleague either. So if we're going to implement something in terms of a process where the colleagues are going to, you know, be disadvantaged by that, that's not the right thing for the colleague, because then the colleague makes it not right for the business. So it's that coaching role has been really useful. So the coach has been training them in how to have those difficult conversations, I suppose. So the only thing we haven't had yet, and I don't know whether or not that'll be next year, because I think the leave had already been booked, is the Christmas holiday conversation, which, having been a team leader myself, whenever there's conflict, it's always Christmas holiday season. So people become very different when it's, you know, a personal thing, which Christmas always is, and they're less flexible and less likely to kind of go, no, you can have Christmas off. It's much more of a conflict and conversation because everybody wants to have Christmas off. We're very lucky that we closed down with Christmas and New Year, so it's only the week before and the week after. But and coming from somewhere where we didn't have that, I think I'm incredibly lucky. I have started to see, when we had conversations with them, there was straight away, well, I've already got my leave booked in. And it's those difficult conversations going forward that coach role is really going to have to be a good coaching role. Without a team leader, without a manager, you've got to be able to have those really important conversations, listen to everybody's point of view, and come to the right decision for the business and the customers. So we'll see how that goes. So far, it's going quite well.
I'd love to hear more about it. I think it sounds really interesting to have more coaches in general anyway. Not enough places have coaching. My business wouldn't have got to where it's gotten the last 2 years without a coach. And yet, in my first 3 businesses I worked for, I didn't have a coach. And it makes such a difference. And it was far more useful than having a manager. So completely agree. Andrew mentioned in the chat, I completely agree with, this was a point back to the qualification point, that I think people in the hierarchy should have some form of housing qualification. But at the same time, I joined as an officer from having been in the police previously. So I do think qualifications across the board would definitely help reassure the public there is a standard. And as Shana's put, the best advice I ever had was, if I could explain why I've made a decision and what I base my decision on, that would be okay. It takes a bit more than that, but I've given that advice to others. I'm going to jump back to the chat in a minute, but Michelle's been waiting. So Michelle, I'm going to bring you in, then I'm going to jump to Nigel.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, I think the last few comments have actually been quite poignant, because I was thinking, I mean, I did my ILM 7 executive coaching and mentoring earlier in the year, and actually based it on the social housing sector and the looming capability gap that the CIH and the ILM report came out at the end of 2020. And I actually phrased it as self-authoring teams, not self-managing. But I was intrigued of how that's actually going to work, because it's, when you look at leadership management training, sometimes there's always that ego that kind of flips, and it's how to manage that. Out of curiosity, did the people that you've picked for this dynamic have any psychometric testing or anything to see what kind of fit they were?
They did afterward pick them, because what we didn't want to do was kind of preempt, and you have to be able to scale these things up as well. So after we'd pick the team, we did do some psychometrics with them, and we did a skills analysis as well. So not just the kind of personality type, but also the skill sets, and not just in their current roles, but what skills have they previously had, just to see kind of where we were. and also to help us understand how that might play out, because if you've got a skills gap and certain personality types, that would be a disaster. As it happens, they're fine. There's been no disaster. But also it's good for them as well, because I'm not always a believer in all psychometric tests, and not all psychometric tests are equal. But I do think that a level of self-awareness is another thing that maybe in housing we have always missed. So we've started to invest quite heavily in making sure our leaders and our managers are self-aware. So those psychometric tests and getting them to understand their personality type, their approach to things, why they may have a difficult conversation with one person that they wouldn't have with another. And I think that's something as a sector we maybe haven't invested in properly in the past. And that may be something that in future we want to do when we're recruiting people. There's no point in recruiting people who are a particularly dominant, like say a dominant personality into a role where you want somebody who's a bit more considerate and is maybe more thoughtful. If you've got somebody going into that and kind of attacking, and you know you've got people in that team that don't respond well to that, you're not going to get what you need. So yeah, that has a lot more kind of role to play.
Interesting balance when it comes to
the psychometric testing. Sorry, Matt.
No, please do.
Yeah, the psychometric testing, it's only a picture of that person at that given point. There could be loads going on in their personal life that will impact that anyway. And you mentioned trust at the very beginning of this speech, and I think it is that trust element and that container of safety, that psychological safety that needs to be brought in. And I like to describe it as a murmuration. Everybody's seen a murmuration around about this time of year, where there's no lead within those birds. They just know the movement that they're going into. So yeah, I'm going to be really looking forward to see how this pans out, Katie.
We'll no doubt be picking this up again next year. Katie, congratulations. Nigel, over to yourself. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. I'd just like to offer a different perspective on Alison's take, and a few others have commented about the sort of inside approach. And actually something struck a chord, because I'm an observer, more like I'm not operationally involved, I'm simply a tenant. But something that struck a chord with me was this comment that you made, Katie, about fixed or insular ways of dealing with things. Now, I've noticed an observer, particularly in social housing, what I would call a linear thinking. So everybody's following the same kind of linear thinking, not thinking outside the box, because they're driven by these KPIs, these TPIs, these V grade, the V and G grades and everything. And I think part of it is also what you said, Katie, is the long term versus the short term. You're so focused on the short term goals, it's very difficult to approach a kind of a different thinking mentality. But listen, in other sectors I've worked in that are more linked to evolving cultures or finance or whatever's going on, they have to be more adaptive. They have to be actually very, very adaptive. And I think what we've got here is almost I think it's systemic culture of just being stuck where we are. And I think that may be resource-led as well. I'm on this new government social panel, and what we've got really is a disappointing, very prescriptive role. We're basically following the policies. They just have to be implemented in realistic ways. And I think this is a kind of endemic problem in social housing, this kind of fixed approach to solving the big problems, which are evolving very quickly with the same structure. It's a big challenge. It's a huge challenge. But how everybody's looking for the solution. How we do it, I don't know. But long term and short term, I did like that. Thank you very much, Katie.
No problem.
I completely agree. And I think, when we're looking at resources and trying to fix things, that's where's the, it is the balance. And there are issues with the short term, but we've been trying to fix short-term problems for so long that people have missed the bigger picture, I feel. Alison said, I remember model in supported cooperative housing, all staff on equal salaries a long time ago. Another certain way to look at it. Joe has been in leadership roles for years and empathises with the Christmas conversation. I'll be honest with you, I'm dating a nurse who's working the 24th, 25th, 26th, 27th, 28th. Yes, so I'm sat for most of Christmas on my own on the Xbox. So I am anyone who's working in housing, but it's my time off because housing's closed down. So I can't do any work because none of you are recruited. So yeah, it's just be sad. This is going to be great. Claire said, I think that's definitely a good starting point, Sian, but my worry is that we don't know what we don't know. And I'm including myself in that. I know data protection law well, but I'm constantly learning about other laws, for example. And I think this is where this data sharing piece is not data sharing, but you know what I mean, Claire. I dare say data sharing, right, Claire? But data sharing piece is so important. And as Joe's put, good leaders are coaches. Claire said the circumstances I were talking about were seen as the right thing with firm foundations based on the knowledge that people had involved at the time. They didn't know how to look at the situation from a different perspective, and looking at circumstances from a different perspective is something I'm always trying to find a way to teach, especially for data protection. But it applies to all policy decisions and is very prominent in the training I'm co-hosting on EDI. Couldn't agree more with everything you've put there, Claire. And I think sometimes that's where the balance is. And I love this idea of do the right thing, but thinking about it not just because so often businesses will say, oh, we're just here for the tenant, we're all about the tenant, when you're not, because you're a business. So part of your decisions have to be based on the business. Why not talk more openly about that? Sian, thank you for being so patient. Great to have you with us today.
Morning, everybody. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, it was just a couple of things, really. I mean, Katie, absolutely love this concept and really interested to see how it goes. And the Christmas one, yeah, I was just laughing to myself because I had to do the out of hours Christmas rota last year, whereas interim, and I just remember thinking, but my scenario, my solution was you're all adults, you all got the plans and things, sort it out amongst yourselves, and they did. But it's like, yeah, I get that. But I think for me, when we're talking about resources and training and all this sort of thing, the thing that stuck straight with me when I saw the rent cap and I listened to what people were saying, and I thought about colleagues that were still working on the operational line, and I thought, they'll be worrying that staffing will go, that things will go and their jobs will get more difficult, we'll get more demotivated staff. So what do we need to be looking at? And it is as simple as saying, what resources have I got and where are their skills needed most and what skills have we got? And restructures, somebody put in the chat about, how much does it cost for a restructure? Change the moment and saying, you're re-engineering skills, you're redefining what you need, and use the skills that people have got to move those resources around. Because A, you might find that people are much more engaged and rewarded at what they're doing, but B, it stops that knee-jerk reaction of saying we don't need training, we can't afford training, we can't afford new people. A housing officer leaves, we can't afford to replace them, so you end up losing all your housing officers, and then you say you can't afford to replace them. So I think we have to have, as Matt was saying, a much more business focused approach to it, and rather than just sort of saying, we do this, and we've got to do this, we've got to do that, we've got to do the other, we've got to merge it. And they're doing the right thing, and picking up about how you said, Katie, to Claire's point about data protection, we still very much see that data protection is the person over there's job, that they'll sort it out. We still very much see that damp and mold problems are the repairs team job. We still see that building safety is the asset management and the repairs team. We've got to move away from that and see that actually we're a team. And if you look at the most successful teams, if you take the sporting world, the most successful teams understand what the common goal is, what they're trying to achieve, and how each of their roles fit into making that a success. And I think, that's the kind of approach that housing providers at the moment have got to be looking at, because they won't survive otherwise if they're not smart about what they do.
And I think that's why the innovation festival we just had, for me, is exactly why I'm proud to work for the organisation that I do, because it didn't matter what trade or what job you did, you got an opportunity to go away on all 3 days if you wanted, or one of the 3 days, and get and interact with people you wouldn't ordinarily interact with, and do things that may have looked like a really crazy thing to do. So building stuff out of Lego sounds like an absolutely bizarre thing to be doing, but actually taught them a lot of things around how they work together as a team, and how you would throw something in, so you would change the scenario, and they had to kind of adapt how they then worked as a team. So at the outset it looked like a really bizarre exercise, but actually they all really, really enjoyed it. And what they really enjoyed was talking to people that I would never normally talk to, sitting on tables with people that would never have come across in the business before. And I think that's kind of why the innovation piece for me is the really important piece that we need to continue to invest in.
A couple of people there said that sounds way better than the usual staff conference approach, and not bizarre at all. Joe's used it in project management training. I think Lego is, I'm fully recall some of the best team building stuff I ever did was just, right, see who can build the biggest tower out of toilet paper, whatever. These things do bring people together, and you see mindsets. I'm conscious we've only got 3 or 4 minutes left, and that I guess the overarching discussion point for today was whether or not housing has the resources to be proactive. I think part of the issue right now is that housing is having to be reactive because of almost where it's found itself. I think particularly with some of the larger organisations in particular. Katy, I guess just to wrap up, do you think that housing has got the resources to be proactive, or do you think this is something that collectively we really need to work on over the next 12 months?
I don't think we do. And I think part of that as well is that we're being done to a lot. So we're being told by government what we have to do, and there's not a lot of help and support to get where we need to get to. So I think if you think about what's been asked of us, all the retrofit programs, all the energy efficiency stuff, all the providing of new housing in terms of the housing crisis, we're being asked to deliver a lot of things and not being given any additional support to do that. It's almost like you've been beaten with a stick for things you can't really help but do, if that makes sense. So I have a toddler, and it's almost like saying to her that radiator's hot and then being surprised when she touches it. There needs to be some support for social housing if they want us to deliver what we want to deliver. Like, I think as a sector, nobody's in this sector wanting to deliver poor quality housing or to put tenants at risk or in danger. What we want to do is deliver good quality housing, and we want to have our tenants live a full and safe life. That's what we want. I mean, our goal as a business is a life without barriers. That's what our strapline is, and that's what we want to deliver for our customers. It's very hard to do that when things change every 5 minutes, and you've got the cost of living crisis, and you've got the lack of finances. That to me is
housing ministers in a year.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we don't even know which Clark it is. Was kind of, I think, one joke at one point. We're not sure which Clark it is anymore, and I think that doesn't really help because you're not really getting any steer. So I think for me, we don't have enough resource, but I think part of that we can do some of it ourselves. So kind of what I've talked about, the innovation, the culture, not being short-sighted, being long-sighted, taking the long view of kind of what we should do. But I think also the partnership stuff. So exactly what we're doing today, that is invaluable. You know, I've talked a little bit about what we're doing. There'll be other people out there who have really good examples that we would love to learn from, that we'd love to talk to, and that partnership work. And for me is something we can do. We do need more resources though, and we do need a government that's going to kind of invest in us as a sector and take us seriously as a sector, rather than just seeing us as the big bad wolf that I don't think we are, and I don't think we want to be either. So no.
I completely agree with you. Thank you so much for bringing it to the table today. I think there is a real need for, you know, there's so much pressure on housing. You know, I think the big part is that delivery of new stock, when, you know, so many tenants rightfully say, well, look, you're not looking after the stock you've got. But on the flip side, you know, the argument is, well, the government aren't using local authorities to build affordable homes, so somebody has to. And it is a real pressure cooker. But that idea of long-sighted versus short-sighted is brilliant, and I can't wait to hear how everything goes. We'll definitely be bringing you back on to find out how the pilot's gone. I hope you've enjoyed this today. Thank you to everybody who could come. Next week is going to be the last one of the year, because I figured 20th of December was probably a bit too late for many, even me. Though Katy and I were talking before, I might run a quiz. So we'll see. Next week is going to be a really poignant one. We've got Jenny Blake on, and she's going to be talking about the cycle of burnout in housing, which I think if ever there was a time to be talking about burnout in housing, it probably is right now. So thank you, everybody. Katy, you've been brilliant. Thank you to everybody who came along today. And I look forward to seeing you all next week for the last one of the year. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers.